Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Metal Mastermind. On today's episode, we're going to talk to you about the difference between using a sampled drum set versus a real recorded drum set. Why should you choose one over the other? And are samples really just trash, or do they have some use in the recording studio? Let's find out. Now, there are a couple of pros and cons to using a sampled drum set over a real drum set, and vice versa. But the better question is, when do I use these instruments? Because sometimes it's easier to use a sampled instrument than it is a drum. And also, drums are real drums, so doesn't that beat out the samples? Aren't samples just perfectly sounding drums anyway? This is a big question when it comes to composers and recording engineers all around the world. Where's their place? Well, the first thing is, samples are perfect recordings. There's no other way to say that. And the thing is, when you're using a perfect recording of each individual part of the drum set, when you put those things together, they're still individually recorded perfect sounding drums, just not cohesively together. And that's the problem. Because when you're actually recording drums, you have what we call bleed. And no, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about bleed from other microphones getting into other microphones. So when you are having this sort of jelly glue between all of the other microphones, you get this entire thing called a drum set. And that drum set is comprised of multiple different sound waves hitting those different microphones at different times. It's a phenomenon called phase. Now, phase tends to be a very tricky thing for engineers and musicians to work with, mainly because if one wave counters the other, you get cancellation. And that's a big issue in the recording studio. But phase is part of the timbre of hearing a drum set. It's physically impossible to get all of the toms and all of the snare and all of the overhead mics to be really in phase with one another perfectly. Perfect just doesn't exist here. So, taking that into consideration, when you use a perfectly recorded drum with samples, you are really looking outside of reality. That's not how the real world works. But where is their use? Samples are incredibly convenient. We love to use samples because samples allow us to compose our ideas quickly and efficiently. Now, composing with samples gives you that flexibility of if you don't like something, you could always change it. Unlike recording real drums, if you record something, that's the take. So you have to commit. That could be a good and bad thing. Sometimes by limiting what your options are allows you to focus on moving forward with something. But if you're still in that writing process and you don't really know where it's going to go yet, it makes more sense to use samples. And in that case, if you finalized your performance, then go out and record it at a recording studio. Now, why isn't the samples good enough? Well, because drummers are people. We're human, we make mistakes, we're not perfect robots. And that's a defining feature about using a drummer. A drummer will help bring life to your music just the same way as if you hired somebody to play actual guitar on your track rather than using a MIDI guitar. Sure, the MIDI guitar might be in some ways convenient because then you can just rewrite the note right there and then, just like you can do with the drums. However, doesn't quite sound like a real guitar. Hence, doesn't quite sound like a real drum set either. Drummers have nuances. They can embellish with the grooves, push, pull, the tempo. These are things that come naturally to a drummer's instinct and quite literally are really, really hard or impossible to reproduce with samples. And of course, that process is much less painstaking. As a drummer, myself, when I know how to approach playing a song, I know how to play it, even if it's just through instinct. With samples, I have to make sure that every single hit is nuanced the way I want it to. I have to spend hours at the computer, pinpointing every single one of those notes, and it takes too long, and quite honestly, I'd probably be more lazy to continue editing that way, and thus I'm not really getting the end result that I always wanted. I'd much rather just play it and execute it right, the way I want to, the way how I actually feel. Of course, that means there's more money involved. So yeah, recording a drum set is better in the performance area. Of course, if you have a good performer behind the drum set, that is another variable you have to keep in mind. But it does mean you have to spend, if you don't have the space already yourself, to find a suitable area to work on recording drums. That can be very costly. Some studios may charge $1,000 a day, $100 an hour for 10 hours in order to get the sound that you've always dreamed of. And if you don't get the sound that you've always dreamed of, well, then you kind of have to do a lot more work at the mixing end to make up for it. So, do you spend the money, get a great drum sound, and have a crying wallet? Or do you spend more time trying to do all the nuances yourself with the computer? This is a debate you must have. And if you ask us, it's a no-brainer going with the real drummer. But we absolutely use samples when time is short and things need a quick turnaround, or when we just want to jot down our ideas.
Now, to elaborate on all of the points that Ken just made, we're going to take you through the process here real quick and show you how we actually use the fake drums for our theme song for Metal Mastermind. We're going to let you hear what that sounded like, and then we'll let you hear what it sounds like with the real drums recorded. So here is the first original track that we created for Metal Mastermind. So as you can see, or hear rather, we recorded the guitars and the bass track, and then we just used a simple drum program for the drum track. And what this did was it allowed us to capture the drum sound, or not really the drum sound, but the drum patterns that we were looking for to fit this type of song. And this also gives the drummer, whoever your drummer is recording that, it also gives the drummer somewhere to start. They can hear kind of the ideas you have. Now, one thing we do recommend is if you're doing the fake drums to give to the drummer in order for them to kind of follow that format, we also recommend that you give them some free rein as well to let them do what they think sounds best as well. You can have the format laid out for them, that's fine, but again, give your drummer the freedom to be creative, because that's what's going to make your song really come to life. So here's what the track sounds like with the real drums. Now let's hear that one more time, but without the music. So here's the fake drums, just the drums. And here's the real drums, just the drums. So in that recording of just the drums, that last track you just heard, the real drums, you could really hear the room that Ken was talking about, how, you know, everything's kind of picked up and it just sounds so much more lively and so much better. So the moral of the Metal Mastermind drum story here is it's okay to use fake drums for a few scenarios here. One being you're just trying to get your idea down and you want to hand that off to a real drummer so they can have a guideline, just a format to go by. Or if you're just putting stuff out there, just some quick clips on social media or SoundCloud, YouTube or whatever, and it's not quote unquote professional, then okay, maybe use fake drums for that, because you probably don't have the budget to hire a real drummer every time you want to put something out on social media or YouTube, which in some cases for some of you is every day. The time you want to use real drums, when you want to hire a real drummer, or if you are a real drummer, of course, record your own drums, is when you're going to release something professionally that's going to have your name or your band's name behind it. If you're putting something out there on iTunes or Spotify, or you're creating an album, a CD or whatever, that's something you really want to have real drums for.
That's it for today's episode on Metal Mastermind. Thanks for watching this video. If this information was useful to you, please consider liking the video. It helps our channel and helps support us grow. And if you want more content, be sure to subscribe to Metal Mastermind to get weekly podcasts here on YouTube. And if you join our newsletter, you'll get access to our quick guide to the ultimate home studio absolutely free. Thanks again. And remember, horns up.